Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming here on this beautiful spring night. We appreciate you taking a little bit of time out. My name is Mike Brickner. I am the executive director of the ACLU of Delaware, and I am very proud to welcome you to this event tonight. You all are in for, I think, a really great treat. You're going to be hearing from two really keen legal and political minds who are going to be talking about a really important topic and a really important piece of history. The murder of Emmett Till is a story that many of us might have been taught in school, might have learned about through the news. But what Ron Collins has been able to do in this book is really explore the history and the legal documents that came from the case. And as the executive director of the ACLU, I can tell you a lot of the themes that you're going to be hearing tonight are still themes that we are struggling with as a country. Around police practices, fairness in our courts, how survivors and victims' family members are treated in our criminal legal system. And so Ron and Shanta are going to be touching on all of that. So you are really in for a treat tonight. But I do have a couple of logistical things to go over before we get started. So first of all, I really want to thank the Lewis Public Library and particularly Rebecca Lowe for doing all of this setup work. Thank you. They are definitely the best hosts in Sussex County, and I might even say the whole state of Delaware. I also want to thank the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice, the League of Women Voters of Delaware, the Delaware Human and Civil Rights Commission, and the YWCA Delaware for helping to co-sponsor this event as well. It's great having such good community partners as y'all. So you will be hearing from Ron and Shanta here momentarily, but as you are listening to them, if you have a question that comes to mind, something that you want to learn a little bit more about, all of you have index cards at your seat. Feel free, get out a pen or a pencil, write down your question. Once you have that question, raise it up. Somebody will come and grab those questions. At the end of the program, we'll have time reserved for questions and answers for people to, for Shanta to be able to ask Ron. In addition, if you are tuning in on the internet, you don't have to unmute yourself or anything. You can simply type the question into the chat, and Rebecca will record that, and we will get that question asked as well. So let me go ahead and introduce our two wonderful speakers here tonight. So first of all, on my far side here, we have Ron Collins. He is the library's distinguished lecturer. He is a retired law professor and co-founder of the History Book Festival. Tragedy on Trial is his 13th book, a very lucky number. The foreword to that book was written by Congressman Bobby Rush, and the For the Record introduction was done by Lonnie Bunch, the Secretary of the Smithsonian. Earlier this year, Ron also published a book on Simone Weil, titled A Declaration of Duties Toward Humankind. Later this year, he plans to teach classes here at the library on both books, so stay tuned for that. Next, our wonderful moderator for this evening is Shanta Howard Wilkinson, Esquire, and she is the founder of Shanta Wilkinson Consulting, LLC, where she provides diversity, equity, and inclusion and nonprofit board governance consulting and assistance to organizations implementing strategies and best practices. She previously served as the Associate Director of EEO Affirmative Action for Kings County Hospital in Brooklyn. In addition, she also served as a Deputy Attorney General and an EEO AA coordinator for the New Jersey Office of the Attorney General. She holds a JD from Rutgers University School of Law and a BA from Rutgers College. Shanta serves on the boards of several nonprofit organizations across Delaware, including the Lewis Public Library. And now you can see why I said you all are in for such a great treat tonight. You have two amazing minds. They're both wonderful people. And with that, I will turn it over to Shanta to carry us away. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Try that again. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and thank you all for being with us this evening. I wanted to put out a brief disclaimer that throughout the discussion, we will hit upon some topics that may be a bit upsetting, as well as show some images that may be a bit graphic at times. So we just wanted to let everyone know that we will be displaying some images. So with that, I will jump right into it. Professor Collins, how did you come to write Ron, how did you come? How did you come to write this book?
Well, before I answer that, let me just say yet again with the Lewis Public Library, and can you hear me? What a joy it is to be doing yet another event with the Lewis Public Library, and Rebecca Lowe, we cannot say enough about the remarkable things this woman in this library does. And a big thank you, a shout out to the ACLU of Delaware and the other co-sponsors of this group. But I will say this, and forgive me, working with this woman is incredible. It has just been a real joy. I'm so excited. And believe me, listen to me, including Mom, the best is yet to come, so stay with us. It's the beginning of, I think, of a long, well, how does they say at the end of the Casablanca? I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. And if any of you are old enough, Shanta, so much, a big thank you. So now you asked me a question.
Yes, I did. I will start again. How did you come to write this book?
So it all began with Vassar, which is where Susan Cohen, my wife, went to college. Vassar had arranged a civil rights tour 4 years ago through an organization called Distant Horizons, and so we'd gone on this tour. It was really quite remarkable, and learning one thing after another. And there was two professors from Vassar. One of whom was Tanisha Means. And Tanisha, if you're listening, a big shout out to you, more about her in a moment. And so we just were learning so much about the history of civil rights. And then we came to this courthouse in Mississippi where the Till trial had occurred. In the early 90s, I'd written a piece on Emmett Till for the Baltimore Sun. So I knew the story, but I was sitting there in the courthouse and I was so eager to hear. And the guy spoke for about 10 minutes. And I thought, there has to be more to this story. And one thing led to another. And I found myself more and more involved. And I was surprised that though a lot of people had written books about Till and documentaries and what have you, nobody had ever taken a hard look at the trial. And so one thing led to another. And then I got to teach a class here. I guess it was 8 or 10 lectures, something like that, on the Till trial, and that required me to do a deep dive. And so that's how it began. And I will just say this. This book is, I think, the most important one I've ever written. Next one, we'll see. But for the time being, this is the most important one. And it was the most difficult to publish because publishers said, trial transcripts don't sell. And I said, well, this is more than just the trial. This is the Emmett Till transcript. It's never been published. They don't sell. I said, but there's all sorts of commentary, introductions, annotations. They don't sell. And so I want to give a big shout out to Carolina Academic Press and Keith Sipe and my colleagues and friends there at CAP for picking this book up and doing a wonderful job with it. And I think, as Lonnie Bunch said when I had the honor of having the conversation with him, he said, I think what's in this book is a historic moment. And I thought, I could live with that. So there's an introduction.
Well, thank you. This book is mainly about the murder trial of those charged with killing Emmett Till. What is new and different about your book?
Well, the transcript, there was so much about the Till trial that just vanished. It was just missing. Who knows where it went? So it was missing for all of this time. And then finally, Around 2004, it was discovered a copy of a copy of a copy by the FBI, but it never had been published. And so I thought, wow, what's interesting about the trial transcript is it's the longest document, surviving document from what happened at the time. And believe it or not, there's truth in it. There's also falsehood, misinformation. The court reporter never included the closing arguments. Like, wow. And so one thing led to another, and we're going to be talking about the African American press, really crucial. But I went to things like Jet Magazine, and the various publications, and I was able to recreate a summary of about 15 pages, the closing arguments. So that was really kind of exciting. So there was just a lot about it, and also it was important to emphasize the truth in it, and it was also important to call out the lies in it. And so by annotating it, by writing all sorts of commentaries, by the way, if you buy the book, and I urge you to do so, do it if for no other two reasons, right? The foreword by Bobby Rush, I choked when it came. It's incredible. It really is. The introduction by Secretary Lonnie Bunch, if you just buy the book for those two things, you've gotten your money's worth. But there's another reason, and that is we want to support independent bookstores. And we have a great one here in Browse About Books. So,
Before the trial began, Mamie Till Bradley, as she was known then, held an open casket funeral for Emmett in Chicago. Tell us a little bit about what it took to make that happen and why it proved to be so important.
Well, if you ask yourself, when did the modern civil rights, when did the modern civil rights movement begin? Did it begin with Brown v. Board in 54? Did it begin with Rosa Parks later? It really began in some significant way with the murder of Emmett Till. Now, it wasn't just that this was an innocent boy that had been brutally murdered and kidnapped, because there had been 500 lynchings in Mississippi before Emmett Till. 500 in Mississippi. This would have been just another dead Black person murdered in Mississippi. It would have been just another one of those stories lost to time, right? But there's something important that happened. And that something was that open casket funeral. Now, we all know about that and how tens of thousands of people came. Mothers came with their children. Can you imagine an open casket with this face brutally? It was horrific. I mean, people passing out, children, 12-year-old, 10-year-old children looking at that casket. Tens of thousands of people came. That story you know. What you don't know is that she acted illegally to make that happen. You say, well, acted illegally? How is that? The sheriff had ordered a one-day burial. They wanted that body buried as quickly as possible. And they had put a seal. They sealed the coffin, and it was prohibited under law to open that coffin. And the only way, and so Mamie Till came, and she said, we're taking the coffin with us. But they had to write out an oath. They had to swear that under penalty of being prosecuted, they would not open the coffin. And so they take the coffin out to Chicago. And you could imagine the folks at the mortuary, they're a little hesitant. I mean, it's one thing for Mamie to do this. It's another thing for us. But think about it. Is the sheriff in Money, Mississippi going to come to Chicago and enforce this? Probably not. Anyway, so she brings it there and has this open casket funeral. And Rosa Parks says that part of what influenced her to do what she did is thought of Emmett. And that's half the story. There's more to the story. We're going to get to that in a moment. But think about this, that the fact that she had the courage, to have that open casket funeral and say, look what they have done to my boy, And that story went international. And that was before the trial. So all of a sudden now there's international interest in the trial.
And a bit of that international interest was sparked a bit by David Jackson. Can you say a few words about David Jackson and his role in the history of the Till legacy?
I'm just saying it here. Forgive me for saying this, because Susan's always saying, "Don't have another idea for another book," right? You know, it's like too many ideas, right? But David Jackson, Jet Magazine, Robert Johnson. Oh my God! Oh my God! Those iconic photos were taken by David Jackson. David Jackson, to the best of my knowledge, has never been honored. All right. He went in, he was working for Jet Magazine and the Chicago Defender as well. And he went in and took the photos. This is all before the funeral. He took these close-up photos. And there's photos, we actually have photos of David Jackson taking the photos at the time. And Robert Johnson, who owned Johnson Publications and Jet Magazine, decided to publish those. One of the things I learned in writing this book is you talk to any person of color over 50 and you mention the fact that you're writing something on Emmett Till, to a person, they will say Jet Magazine, right? It was something that generations and generations, but these photos never appeared. They only appeared in African-American publications, primarily Jet and Chicago Defender and a couple of others. And those photos, 400,000 copies. 400 in 1955, 56. That's an enormous number of copies. And that, Mamie Till's open casket funeral and Jet Magazine, those photographs that Robert Johnson, who owned the magazine, who insisted that they be published. And they're hard to see. I mean, you know, imagine, you know, it's 1955, 1956, you know, almost a lot of people of color are reading Jet Magazine, you know, and you open it up and there, I think it was on page 19, is these photos. And it rips you open. And so as much credit as goes to Mamie Till for having that open casket, David Jackson needs to be honored. We need to have some tribute to him. A book needs to be written about Jet Magazine, Chicago Defender, Robert Johnson. Who knows? It may happen. Question is, will I stay married? You know.
Your eyes lit up talking about the possibility of a book. So we shall see what happens. Can you take a second to paint us a picture of the courtroom and what it was like in there in mid-September of 1955?
Yeah. So the courtroom seats about 250 people max, 400 people. 400. It's 100 degrees plus. It's humid. Really no breeze from the windows that are open. A little card table is set aside for the African-American press, all right? And also the witnesses, and also Mamie Till, a table that sits about 6 people. And during the recess, when they got up and came back, guess what? The seats were taken, all right? People took the seats away. For what African-Americans could sit, they sat in the back, all right? The audience is 95% white. People are smoking. During the recess, when there was a break, soda pop was sold to white people only. While the trial is going on, as best Judge Swango, who was actually the judge, just so you know, the judge in the case was about as fair as you're going to get, Judge Swango, in 1955 in Mississippi. It really is remarkable how fair, given the time, he was. And the same thing about the prosecution. But try as they may, imagine it's 100 degrees in there. People are smoking, all right? The 2 children, the 2 boys of the defendants are running around with little toy pistols, running around, you know, playing around. The defendants throughout the trial are smoking cigars. J.W. Milam, one of the defendants, this MF is reading the newspaper. Can you believe that? I mean, here you have this trial, and he's sitting back, smoking a cigar, reading the newspaper. I mean, it's just and laughing and, kind of joking and what have you as all of this goes on. So it's really quite a scene. It's difficult for the African American press to report the story because, they're off on the side. And when the sheriff, I'm going to be talking about him, boy, what a piece of work this guy was. He says when he comes and he tells the African American press, he says to them, quote, welcome niggas. That's what he says to them, all right? Without any reservation at all. So that's really kind of gives you a picture of the courtroom. The judge was trying the best as he could to keep decorum, largely succeeded, but the whole atmosphere had this kind of carnival atmosphere. And by the way, that photograph at the beginning, and a shout out to Alex Lubertazzi, who found that. It's an incredible photograph. It never had been published on the cover before. Two African-American young people sitting outside, unable to get into the courthouse. Oh,
on the cover of the book.
There it is. There it is right there. Thank you. Oh, so that is on the left. Thank you, Susan. Thank you. I'm so glad I married you. So that's J.W. Milam there on the left. These guys were never with their sons, never. This is all photo op, and that's Roy Bryant, and that's Carol Bryant that's the woman that Emmett whistled at. And just so we're clear, he did whistle. All right, everything else is not true, but his cousins, Parker Wheeler and others who were there, they have verified that he whistled. They realized how dangerous that was. But there they are. And they're doing this little photo op with the kids, the boys. But when they let go, can you imagine they're running around with guns, just little toy guns, and it just shows you this was like a carnival. They knew they weren't going to be convicted, but not for the reasons you may think. Stay tuned. That's like a little teaser.
It's a good teaser.
Oh.
It's a great teaser. And speaking of the photographs, when we were preparing for today's discussion, Ron shared some photos with me, and one was a scene of the defendants either entering or exiting the courthouse, and one had a smirk on his face, cigar in hand. The sheriff they weren't handcuffed, by the way, and that we're talking about defendants charged with murder. They should have been handcuffed and kidnapping, so they should have been in handcuffs. And the sheriff was without a gun. You couldn't see any sight of any gun. So this casualness, this comfort level, and this smugness was very present throughout the entire trial.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, a brutal murder, and the guys aren't handcuffed. They're just walking into the courthouse. I mean, the photo is just incredible. So thank you.
Thank you. There was also a monument in front of the courthouse that is still there. Can you tell us about that as well?
Yeah. So if you go there to in front of the courthouse, there's a Confederate monument, and it's a tribute to the cause that will never die. If you can believe that. I mean, that monument, I think it was there about the turn of the century. It's still there. It's still there, which raises a kind of interesting question to think about. Should that monument come down? All right. Because it is the vestiges of racism of the worst kind? Or should it remain to kind of remind people, all right, what people went through when they went into that courtroom, what they were faced with, right outside the courtroom? You don't have the Justicio holding the balance, justice in the balance. You have this Confederate monument to the cause that should never die.
And it's interesting to see, as is reflected in the book, the ways people are memorialized throughout this. At one point, while reading the book, I noted in the footnotes, which I must add, the footnotes are full of so much information that, thank you, Ron, for sharing in the footnotes, that provides you not only a background, but just additional information about so many aspects of the trial, so many aspects of what was happening in the community, in the state at that time. And one thing I noted in the footnote, that I know we will talk about the sheriff a bit later, but there, I believe 2 years following his death, by state statute, there is a memorial highway, or part of a highway is named after him. In fact, it is named the Henry Clarence Strider Memorial Highway. And several years post-trial, the same sheriff also served as a state senator.
Yeah, and we haven't even got to a character profile of this guy. I mean, this guy gives bigotry a new name. I mean, it's just over the chart, but we haven't gotten to him
We
yet.
haven't gotten to him yet,
So,
but
more teasers.
there is one positive person that I would like to talk about, and that is Dr. T.R.M. Howard. And what was his role, or why was his role in the Till murder case so important? And also, how did Medgar Evers fit into the picture?
Yeah, well, a book has been written about Dr. T.R.M. Howard, and so that's one I won't write. But a remarkable man, a surgeon, an entrepreneur, a man of means, an African American, launches the first civil rights group in Mississippi in the early 50s, very well educated. And he owns a big home on a lot of land, a couple of stories, I think it was, a huge fence around it. And so ask yourself this. When Mamie Till came, when Medgar Evers came working with the NAACP, he was in Mississippi at the time, when that was my mom calling probably. When Medgar Evers came, when Mamie Till came, when the reporters for the African American press came, where did they stay? Right? Where did they stay? I'll tell you one place they didn't stay. They didn't stay anywhere around the courthouse for about 100 miles. They stayed at Dr. T.R.M. Howard's place. And it was known as the Black Command Center, all right? And so two things happened there, all right? One, people like Mamie Till and the witnesses, they had a place to stay that was safe. He had men at the gates with guns. So, like, if you're coming here, expect trouble, right? So it was safe harbor. It was a safe place to come. And he also had the black press and Medgar Evers. They would go out into the fields and find witnesses, people who had witnessed what had happened. Because one of the things I should say is the prosecution had 13 days after the grand jury issued its indictment. It issued an indictment for kidnapping and murder. It had 13 days to prepare its case. 13 days. Think about that for a major murder case. So Dr. T.R.M. Howard is having these reporters and Medgar Evers going out to the fields and talking to people who saw the witnesses and said, well, what happened to this? And where can we find this witness? And where can we find that witness? Really important work this man did. And what they were finding out was that some of the witnesses were vanishing and not of their own volition either. And so he plays a key role. And I just think that at least so much of my research couldn't have been possible. You know, there's sometimes the people in the back, you know, that they're so important, but it's like the fish don't notice the water, but it's essential. And Dr. T.R.M. Howard, this man was absolutely crucial in the whole Emmett Till story.
Thank you. Speaking of another man crucial in the story, Moses Wright. He testified at the trial. Who was he, and why was his testimony so important?
Moses Wright is the great uncle of Emmett Till, and in August he goes to Chicago to bring Emmett to Mississippi. All right, they're going to spend the summer in Mississippi and what have you with his relatives, his cousins, and others, and Wheeler Parker, his cousin's going to come with him, and it's going to be a very exciting time. Moses Wright he didn't know that Emmett had whistled. He did not know that at the time. Had he known that Emmett had whistled, Emmett would have been out of Mississippi within like that. He did not know. What he did know was that on August 28th, 1955, at 2 a.m., men with guns were at his door, pounding at his door. All right. And, you know, and they wanted to know, where's the black boy? Where's the black boy that whistled? And if you could imagine, whistled, what are they talking about? And so there, Moses Wright is important because he sees the defendants. All right, that's going to be important, right? And they take Emmett, they kidnap him, and it's important because he sees the kidnapping, and the kidnapping issue is a very important one. We're going to get to it in a moment. And then he testifies. He's the I believe the first witness for the defense, for the prosecution rather. Excuse me. And at an incredible moment, he stands up and points and he says, "That's them. They're the ones." All right. And actually, there was a photo taken.
The photos on the screen.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Mm-hmm. And you have a sketch of it, and there's the photo as well. Contrary to court rules. And if you think about it, think about what courage it took for this man. And he wasn't staying at T.R.M. Howard's place. He was staying at his own place. They could have come and murdered him anytime. And so it took remarkable courage for him to do what he did. And I think another one of the unsung heroes of the Till trial.
Definitely. And even with all of that courage, there was such a lack of respect for him and many of the other African-American witnesses throughout the trial. They were addressed by their first names and never by their surnames. So it was just a constant lack of respect, constant disregard displayed throughout the entire trial, which we will get into a bit more in a few moments. Though the all-white jury took only 67 minutes to reach a not guilty verdict, you argue that there is so much more to the story, especially given the actions of the sheriff. Can you tell us a bit more about him?
Well, 67 minutes, and that included a soda break. All right. They thought that they should extend the time. But the conventional story of the Till trial is all white male jury, 67 minutes. You go there, you check in. I'm sorry? That's the jury, people. Now you see why I married this woman. Yeah. Thank you, Spirit. So I'm on a roll here. I'm trying to look here. So yes, there's the jury. Mainly farmers. Some carpenters, but that's mainly what they are. But the conventional story is it took 67 minutes. All right, and an all white male jury, and that's really all you need to know. Not quite true. Even if there was a fair jury in Mississippi in 1955, which is right, really stretching the truth, but let's assume hypothetically you could do that, the result might have been the same. Not because the defendants were innocent. These guys were as guilty as sin. They had confessed to kidnapping to the sheriffs when they were arrested. They had confessed to kidnapping. So the reason was, and the African-American press, they all knew this. They all knew this early on. The fix was in. The fix was in because the sheriff had made the prosecution's case all but impossible. One, did he ever interrogate the defendants? No. Did he handcuff them? No. All right. Did he have an autopsy? No. All right. And as to witnesses, did he help the defense? The prosecution with witnesses. Not only did he not help them, he was finding these people who were witnesses and having them taken to another jurisdiction and held in a jail while the trial went on so they couldn't testify. All right. The African-American press, Medgar Evers, they knew this. They knew this going in. And then he tells the press early on, he says, the whole thing looks like a deal made by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. What he was telling the press at the time is, this body that they found, all right, that I once signed a death certificate, I said this was Emmett Till. Of course, he'll later deny that in court. And he'll say, we can't identify the body. We don't know who this is, right? But he says at a press conference that the NAACP brought this body in. This wasn't Emmett Till. Emmett Till was in St. Louis or somewhere else, all right? And that this whole thing is being organized by the NAACP to stir up race riots in Mississippi, all right? And by the way, this fellow, he owned a 1,500-acre cotton plantation that was worked by 35 black families. And he was the sheriff of Tallahatchie County from 1951 to 1955. I am happy to say that after the trial, a lot of those families who were close to being destitute left. And it took a lot. It took a lot to leave. So anyway, if you think, by the way, Sheriff Strider, he's also working with the defense, all right? He is working with the defense lawyers, all right? He's telling them what to say, what not to say, what he can do. Believe it or not, he is called as a witness for the defense. When's the last time the prosecution called a sheriff as a witness for the defense, right? So the point is yes, there was a 67 minutes for the jury. Yes, it's all white male. By the way, it would take a few decades later for women to serve on juries in Mississippi. So if you're white or black, it didn't matter. If you were female, that was enough reason you couldn't be on a jury. He makes it all but impossible for a trial, for a conviction to be obtained. And like I said, even if you had a fair trial, it would have been impossible. And he testifies. He says, I looked at this body. I cannot tell you if it was a white person, it was a black person. I can't tell you if it's young or old. It was so, horrific. But he'd signed a death certificate saying it was Emmett Till. He'd ordered that the body be taken to a, quote, colored mortuary. So, but it didn't play out that way. And so you can see that Sheriff Strider, and just imagine, the legislature passes a statute to name a highway after this guy. And when he dies and the obit is written and he's praised in all the Mississippi papers, guess what they leave out of the story? Emmett Till. H.C. Strider.
And again,
there he is. He's given a subpoena to I've caught this one. He's given a subpoena to Mamie Till Bradley to be a witness, and then that's Judge Swango there on the right, a graduate of Ole Miss. And I'm happy to say, if we have any folks from Ole Miss, that fingers crossed, that's Ole Miss College of Law in Mississippi. And I think there's a former justice on the Delaware Supreme Court who now serves on the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit. And what's her name?
Justice Tamika Montgomery Reeves. Yes.
Yes. And she's from Ole Miss, went to Ole Miss. So maybe when we have the program in Ole Miss, who knows? Maybe we can get it.
Maybe.
So anyway, that's the story of H.C. Strider. Just as evil as they come. And it made, I think the prosecution really did try to do the best they could. There's no evidence that they didn't. And the same thing for the judge. But like I said, the sheriff made it impossible.
But that's what made reading the book so informative and engrossing, was that we were able to get a lot of these facts and a lot of these extra things that we may not have known by reading the footnotes. So that was great that the the footnotes supplied all of this information, especially about the sheriff. Mamie Till Bradley took the stand, and her cross-examination was over the top horrendous. What made it so?
Well, if there's anybody who rivaled the sheriff in terms of his racism, it was one of the defense, well, all the defense lawyers, to be honest with you, but this guy, J.J. Breland, he was a piece of work. And we do have, there is a, that's, well, we'll get to J.J. Breland in a second. But this guy was as bigoted as you come. And so imagine this. You ready? This is just incredible. He asks Mamie Till, because why is Mamie put on the stand? To say, this is my boy. right? I can identify him, right? This isn't some strange body that the NAACP has, quote, planted here. This is my boy. And he had a ring on, and the ring had the initials of his father, Louis Till, all right? All right. So the ring, which we have, they pulled off, and she says, I know my boy. I know my boy from his feet to his head, all right? And that's him. So what does the defense do? Well, they show some photos of Emmett, you know, the beautiful 14-year-old boy that was taken around Christmas of 1955, or 54 maybe. And then they take some photos, they show some photos of the horrific face of Emmett Till after they'd been pulled from the Tallahatchie River. And they said, you know, these two, they cannot be the same person. But worse still, they said, did you have a life insurance policy on Emmett? Did you have a life insurance policy? Yes. And how much was that policy for? $400. And then she says, we took it out when he was a boy. We just took it out. Have you sought to cash that policy? Well, he hasn't, you know, we still have some time to wait. Do you plan to? Yes. And so it's $400 you stand to get, you and your mother. And have you heard that there are these rumors that Emmett is alive in, you know, St. Louis or whatever? So just imagine, all right? There's a reason that Mamie Till did not stay and wait for the verdict, all right? She knew how this was going, all right? And so she leaves with Congressman Diggs, an African-American congressman who was there at the trial. She leaves before the verdict is rendered. But yeah, that's part of what she went through.
And something that stayed with me when reading the trial transcript, and especially when talking about Mamie's testimony while being cross-examined, was how she gave instructions to Emmett as to how he was to conduct himself while in Mississippi. And I think about now, in 2024, many African-American parents are still giving those instructions. They're still giving what we refer to as the talk to our children. So to see Mamie give that and to read her words, I won't read all of it in the interest of time, but when questioned on the stand, she stated that prior to his departure to Mississippi, she told him when he was coming down here that he would have to adapt himself to a new way of life. And I told him to be very careful about how he spoke and to whom he spoke, and to always remember to say yes, sir, and no, ma'am, at all times. And I told him that if an incident should arise where there would be any trouble of any kind with white people, then if it got to a point where he even had to get down on his knees before them, well, I told him not to hesitate to do so. Like if he bumped into somebody on the street, well, and then they might get belligerent or something, I told him to go ahead and humble himself so as to not get into any trouble. So that stayed with me when reading the trial transcript and noting that this mother had to give her son those instructions prior to departure.
You know, what you see depends on where you stand. And until Shanta pointed out the importance of the talk, it hadn't occurred to me. I never got the talk growing up. Why would I know that, right? I mean, I read that and, you know, but it never occurred to me. So when, you know, Shanta pointed that out, it was kind of one of those moments, you know. And, you know, as you say, and I'm going to be doing something on Sunday with in D.C. with Jason Downs, the attorney for Freddie Gray. And, you know, when I mentioned, you know, the talk to him, you know, he knew the talk. So I think, you know, I think this is where, you know, cross-racial conversation and dialogues are so important, because there's certain things, like I say, what you see depends on where you stand. And so thank you.
Thank you. And Carol Bryant, the woman who Emmett whistled at, took the stand. What can you tell us about that?
Carol Bryant taking the stand was very iffy for everybody, for the prosecution and the defense. It's iffy because she says that the defendants brought Emmett to the market where she was, and she said, "This is not the boy." Well, when they brought him to the market from Moses Wright's place, that's kidnapping, right? And how in the transcript do they refer to the kidnapping and the murder? Do you remember that?
The incident?
The incident, yeah. The defense, whenever they refer to the kidnapping or the murder, they always say the incident, right? So they have to be careful with her because there's the kidnapping, right? And then she says, well, that when they brought her, when they brought Emmett to her, she said he's not the one. That's what they allege. But if he's not the one, why are they with him, right? What are they doing with him? So that's one thing. But the real reason they wanted her there, is, did Emmett whistle? Yeah, he whistled. And his cousins realized how dangerous that was in Mississippi. And it's just a shame that they didn't tell Uncle Mose, because if they did, he would have got him out of there immediately. He wouldn't have waited until the next morning. But what the defense did was, and here's where Carol Bryant participated in the lie, all right? She said, well, did he touch you? Yes. Where did he touch you? Well, he touched me on my waist, and he put his hands on her waist. Is this how he touched you? All right. And it's all a lie. I mean, none of it happened, right? And this was to inflame the jury. That's its whole purpose. That's all they wanted to do. The rest of it didn't matter, right? And as it turned out, Judge Swango had the wherewithal to exclude that testimony. So the jury, formally speaking, never heard it. I say formally speaking because it appeared in the newspaper the next day, which all the jury read. So, and there you see Carol Bryant there on the left. You see the older Carol Bryant not long before she dies. There she is with her husband, Roy Bryant, on the right. And there she is during the trial, leaning her head on him, kind of somewhat asleep. By the way, she had written a memoir that was supposed to be released in 2036. So the idea was with this memoir, and it wasn't to be released until 2036, which meant everybody would have been dead, right? Everybody Wheeler Parker is still alive, the cousin, so there's some folks that are still around. But the idea was everybody be dead. And so she says but it was released without her permission. I think it was 2022. It's released without her permission. She said, they should have never done to the boy what they did. They maybe should have whipped him, but they should have never done what they did. That was terrible. But she doesn't say that her husband and her brother-in-law were the ones. She said there were other people, all right? So she had planned to go to her grave with that lie, to perpetuate that lie. Say what you will about Carol Bryant. Over the years, federal prosecutors, state prosecutors, African-American grand juries all tried to come after her. It was really difficult to establish a criminal case against her. Was she morally culpable? Absolutely. Was she legally culpable in the sense of being able to prosecute her? Probably not. There was a warrant issued for arrest in 1955. The sheriff never executed that warrant. Emmett's cousins found that warrant, I think in 2022, right around there, and asked that it be served. Had it been served at this point, I don't even know that she was competent to stand trial, but she was willing to go to her grave with this lie,
You argue that the not guilty verdict did not end this criminal case. How so?
Well, remember, Emmett the defendants are originally arrested for kidnapping and murder. They confessed to kidnapping to the sheriffs, but they're only prosecuted for murder. Only for murder, not kidnapping. I won't go into it now, but folks who are lawyers, and I see some here among them, some of my friends, the best way to prove murder is to show that there's another crime linked to it, another felony like kidnapping, because there's something called the felony murder rule. And if you could establish that there was a kidnapping, all right, then any death that occurs in the process of the kidnapping, you don't have to show intent. All you have to do is show that the underlying felony, namely kidnapping. But that was never happened. And why didn't it happen? Why weren't they charged? Because the sheriff said, remember the bad guy, Sheriff Strider, that heavyset guy? He said, the murder happened in my jurisdiction, but the kidnapping happened in another. So you could only prosecute the murder in one place and the kidnapping in another, right? It wasn't true. They both happened in the same place. But so early on, so they're only tried for murder. They're found not guilty. And then 45 days later, a grand jury meets in a different jurisdiction. These guys are as guilty as sin of kidnapping. Obviously, the things that were said in the trial made that clear. A grand jury, hears testimony just for a short period of time and decides, they're not going to indict. And you think the story ends there. It doesn't. I mean, Simone Weil once said, once evil starts, sometimes it's hard to just stop it. It just continues and continues and continues. That's what happened with the Till case. There was a freelance writer named William Bradford Huey. All right, he arranges with the defense lawyers. Remember, they've been found not guilty of murder, not guilty of kidnapping. Right? He arranges with them. He pays them. Right, to get the confessions of the two defendants. Remember, they could now confess because there's double jeopardy. They can say, yeah, we murdered him, right? Because there's double jeopardy. They have to be careful with kidnapping, though, right? So he arranges with them. He pays them, pays the defendants, pays their lawyers. They will edit the story he writes. He sells the story to Look magazine. In 1956, ladies and gentlemen, Look magazine sells 6 million copies of that story. And it's syndicated for another 5 million. So this is in 1956 alone, 11 million copies. It's unbelievable. It gets worse. A guy named Juan Williams writes a book, all right, and it's made into a documentary called Eyes on the Prize. And who's the star? Who's the guy that's hailed? William Bradford Huey. He got the confession. You look at the opening scenes of Eyes on the Prize. There's William Bradford, the great civil rights figure. Not quite. Half of what appeared in that story was lies. When William Bradford Huey says to them, so where did the murder occur? Well, it occurred on so-and-so's plantation. Oh, we can't mention that because so-and-so could be prosecuted. Well, who loaded up the truck? Well, so-and-so. Well, we can't mention them because they could be prosecuted. Well, how did they move the body? Well, we can't talk about that because that's kidnapping, right? So they have to change the places, the persons, and leave a lot of stuff out. The folks that did Eyes on the Prize and Juan Williams were completely hoodwinked. They would have had no reason to know, all right? There was an FBI report. So what I did is I went through everything in the FBI report compared to what happened in Eyes on the Prize and Look magazine. Half of it was lies. And it continues to this day. It continues, again, to Simone Weil. Sometimes once you put evil in motion, it takes decades, to stop. And I think that's what's, in some respects, the Emmett Till story is a story that has to be told to every generation, And I think, as Bobby Rush and Lonnie Bunch mentioned, the true story has to be told.
Thank you. And thank you. I want to call you Professor Collins, but thank you, Ron, for your work in recreating this trial transcript. I know it was a big task, but we are grateful for you for doing such and for keeping Emmett's life and his story on the lips of so many people. And this book is history. This is a recreation of history. It was great for me, and I believe for so many others, to read and hear Mamie's testimony. You spoke of the courage, to see the courage that Moses Wright displayed on the trial. And it's great that you and your other conversation partners, the other people you will be in conversation with, will be able to continue to tell this story, to continue putting the emphasis on combating falsehoods with so much going on right now in schools about teaching African American history and teaching history accurately. It is important to have a transcript like this and to have this documented history. So thank you.
Would you do me a favor?
Yes.
And I just, because there's a nice note to close on, Lonnie Bunch, it was such an honor. And Betsy Griffith and Ann Compton, if you're listening, those are the women that got the book to Lonnie Bunch, the Secretary of the Smithsonian. And he wrote something incredible in the introduction. Do we have that? Do you have it?
Yes, I do. And it is on the slide. Yes.
Yes. Would you just, it's just, I cannot, that this man agreed to meet with me and spend a half an hour with me and just saying, I want to do whatever I can. And do you mind if I write the introduction? I just about passed out. And so,
yes,
would
I
you
will
just read
do
that?
the honor of reading it. The Emmett Till story is an example of how history changes depending on the narrative, how perception can become reality, and how only through an honest appraisal of the evidence can we piece together what truly happened. So thank you for piecing it together. Thank you for allowing me to be in conversation with you.
And I gather that we can go over time a little bit. So
I know we have a few questions possibly.
I can go ahead and read a couple of the ones that have come in from Zoom. Christine wants to know, did the perpetrators suffer in any way societal reputation, alienation from community or family, anything?
Yes. I'm so wonderful question. You know, when you have a short period of time, there's so many things that we didn't touch upon. So whoever the questioner was, thank you for that question. Who went to that market that Roy Bryant and his wife owned? Who went to that market? All right. 90% or more of the people that went to that market were African Americans. All right. That was really the only place for them to shop. And in solidarity, after this trial came down, they stopped, they boycotted that place and it went broke, you know. But that meant they had to drive an hour to 2 hours now to go to another market. So it was really great sacrifice. But yeah, the market closed. I mean, there are other things that happened, but I think that is really significant. And it really just shows how the Emmett Till story moved people, including people who were directly affected.
All right. So for folks in the room, if you have a question, you can hold up the card that you wrote it on and we will gather that. Another one that came in from Zoom is, did Moses Wright suffer any retaliation for testifying?
No. He did leave. He did leave Mississippi, went to Chicago. You know, kind of a sad story about Moses Wright. I mean, he was always in danger. I mean, Dr. T.R.M. Howard did protect him. I mean, he did need protection. He would leave afterwards. He leaves after the trial. It's not safe. It's not, I mean, he has to leave his home and everything. It's not safe to be in Mississippi. Goes to Chicago. Believe it or not, he comes back to be a witness for the grand jury. All right. He comes back. And then goes to Chicago and serves as a janitor Mom, stop calling. So serves as a janitor and what have you. And a very humble man, but no, he was in considerable jeopardy, but fortunately nothing happened to him.
I'm not sure if you saw it, but the recent movie about Emmett Till, would you call that a true depiction of what happened?
Yeah, Till was a really good movie. I mean, you watch these things with a critical eye. You know, if you're a law professor, you write about these things, and you're thinking, I hope they don't steal too much of what I have in my book, which they didn't, right? No, I thought it was really a really good job. I mean, there's always some things that were exaggerated a little bit, but that comes. But I thought all in all it was very good, and we really enjoyed watching it, and I strongly recommend it. Yeah.
The book is titled Tragedy on Trial. Which tragedy does the book title make reference to?
God, where does tragedy begin? Well, in Greece, so the murder, the trial, the sheriff, the grand jury that finds, they're not going to indict them on kidnapping. The William Bradford Huey. I mean, it's all tragic, and tragedy is supposed to be, at least from the Greek perspective, cathartic, but it's still tragic. And I'm just outraged. I mean, I just think about, that Juan Williams and the folks that did this incredible documentary were hoodwinked, and that lie lives on, and it just shows how, truths are never easy, whoever you are. There's at some point where truth kind of looks you in the face and says, humble, just you have to go with it. And it's hard. It's hard for all of us, whatever our color is. But it's worth the story. And, if you're in Texas or Florida or wherever it is and they want to ban books, and I'm hoping that we can get a K-12 version of this, suitable for school children to learn about this important trial.
You talked about the barriers to prosecution. Were there any federal laws then that could have prosecuted the defendants?
That's the problem. So if they had crossed the state line, then there would have been cause for federal intervention. They hadn't. Remember, the Civil Rights Acts, they're still ways away. They're not happening. So there's really nothing that the feds can do. I mean, the NAACP had gone to them. By the way, William Bradford Huey had gone to the NAACP, and he wanted them to give him money so he could, write this tell-all story. Fortunately, they had the good sense to say no to him. But no, there was really nothing that could be done, by under federal law.
Any additional questions?
We have one more. Can you explain how they got out of the kidnapping charge?
Yeah. Well, first of all, remember, the sheriff says we're not going to put kidnapping and murder together because the kidnapping happened in one place and the murder happened in another, and I'm in the jurisdiction where the murder occurred. Well, first of all, Sheriff Strider, no, the murder did not occur in your jurisdiction, number one. And number two, the murder and the kidnapping did occur in the same jurisdiction, and they weren't in your jurisdiction. All right. So at the very outset, he makes it impossible to link the two of them together. And then another grand jury in another county, I think it's LaFleur County, although there's clear evidence, they decide that they're not going to prosecute. And so, but these guys had to be careful. This is where the Look magazine story comes in, They have to be careful, and their lawyers, remember, the lawyers are editing the story before it goes to print, right? They have to be careful that nothing is said there about kidnapping. So, and there's not time to go into the lawyers, but whoa, these guys were as bad as they come. By the way, the Judge Swanga, who just did a remarkable job, dies a year later, and the lead prosecutor commits suicide, shoots himself some years later. So,
and there's one more point that I wanted to end with that we didn't discuss. The March 29th, 2022 signing of the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act, introduced by Congressman Bobby Rush and signed by President Biden.
There's Congressman Rush right there on the right, And I think there's a senator from New Jersey there somewhere. Who's that?
Maybe Cory Booker in the photo.
Yeah, and if folks in New Jersey are listening,
Yes, they are.
Are we
Some
going to
Cory
go to New
Booker?
Jersey?
I think we may.
Okay. So yeah, so there it is, the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act signed. In the words of Sam Cooke, it's been a long time coming, but a change is going to come. So yeah, we were delighted to see, and what an honor. I mean, talking to Congressman Rush, he has a speech impediment because he's had surgery on his tongue and he's old. And we had to wait months and months and months, and talking to him on the phone was always very exciting. And Congressman, if you're listening, thank you. But when he, again, as I said, and am I hustling the book? Yes. So just make that clear. But it's worth it just for his forward and just for Lonnie Bunch's introduction. They're just incredible. So there you see it. What, May 17th?
May 17th.
What's
Please
May 17th?
Please talk a bit about May 17th.
Well, why don't you start?
You can start. You can start.
You want to dance? Right.
We'll do that.
Okay. So May 17th, ladies and gentlemen, and we're working together, and we're working with the library here, and we're working with the ACLU and other groups. So May 17th is the 70th anniversary of Brown v. Board, all right? And it deserves recognition. But here's the exciting thing. Brown v. Board had 5 cases that went to the Supreme Court. They were all consolidated together, all right? And the lead one was out of Topeka, Kansas. And there's this guy named Thurgood Marshall, and he takes the lead. But one of the cases was out of Delaware. Whoa, what a story. And if you don't know the name Lewis Redding, if you don't know the name Colin Seitz, you know, we could go on and on and on. And we are going to go on and on, all right? And it's so exciting. And this is something that Shanta and I have been working on. Joy working with this woman. I just love work. I cannot say how excited I am. And thank you, Mom, for sharing her with us. But it's an incredible story. It gets about 18 pages in Simple Justice, the main work on Brown v. Board. But there's so much to this story. And so I'm happy to say that we've arranged on May 17th here in the library, Judge Thomas Amber, United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit, is going to be interviewing Professor Leyland Ware, who's from University of Delaware, wrote a book on Brown v. Board, knows all about the Delaware case. And it's the beginning of a series of programs. And in the fall, we're going to have a big program, several programs, huge keynote speaker. It's so exciting. I'm so looking forward to it. And so this today was just a teaser, all right? So we'll be working out things in the meantime. Again, May 17th, and you'll see various things. We're going to be doing things in the Gazette, and a shout out to the folks of the Gazette who've been very supportive. And so some of the best is yet to come. So to the Delaware ACLU, to all of our sponsors, to the library, to Rebecca, to my newfound friend, Shanta, a big thank you. And I really appreciate it. And like I said, support the library, give to this library. You know, it doesn't get all its money from the state or the county. Browse about books, you know. They're an independent bookstore. The way these independent bookstores stay in business is when you give to them. So you don't have to go online to that A company, right? You go right here, right in the back, and I'd be happy to sign group books. And to all of you, thank you so much online and in person for coming. It means a lot to me.